Hello, everybody. How are we doing this morning? Good? Yeah, we're awake, alert, awake, alive, enthusiastic, as they say in scouting. How many people had fun at bingo last night? That was pretty cool. I crashed right afterward. I don't know what it is. I'm in this time zone, and yet I feel like I have given everything every single day to the conference. And I love being here. This QR code, the QR code that was on the screen, is not the slide deck for this presentation, but it is about 6 different really useful handouts for you that deal with how to design with accessibility in mind, how to write accessibly, how to create alt text, all sorts of different things that I think you'd find really useful. So please take advantage of that. And feel free to share them with anyone. I don't care. Please just don't steal my content and rebrand it to your own. I work hard on it, but I want to share the information with you so that you have it. So, designing with accessibility in mind is why we're here. This is not a technical session. This is a session about expanding your mind to be thinking about how to design with accessibility at the beginning. We call it born accessibility, so that when you create that document, it's not now's the time to make it accessible, but I've thought about how I'm putting together the information in the beginning. But what I want to first talk about is some of the struggles that we hear. Not enough time, right? Not enough time is the answer I usually get. I don't have enough time to make it accessible, right? Why do I have to dumb down my design for accessibility? This is the one that infuriates me the most. Because usually it comes from a point of ignorance. People say, well, if it's accessible, I have to use a really basic color palette. No. There are millions of colors that you can use. You just have to use them in the right combinations so that you have enough contrast between a foreground and a background or one element to another. And if you think that your design has to be plain or dumbed down or simple when it comes to color, it's because you're not understanding how to use those color principles to open up your ideas for what is accessible color. Well, I just have to pass the checker, right? I mean, that's the one we hear. Well, because I ask the question almost every time I talk to a group, I say, well, how are you validating something's accessible? What makes it accessible to you? Because it can be an ambiguous term. One person's accessibility could be another person's barrier. And oftentimes I say, well, I just pass the Acrobat checker. In fact, I've seen some reports where they've taken a giant table and made a JPEG of it, dumped it back into the table, added some alt text, and said, yes, we passed the checker. And I say, yes, you've created a most ableist experience you could possibly create, because as a person with vision, I can see all the data, but the alt text that someone who has low vision or no vision gets is table 14.2, sales for 2021. That's not the same. But who's checking anyway, right? I mean, really, right? The bottom line to it is I want to know that when I create this document, I've maximized its reach. And if this document is about sales or about product information or leads to a buying decision, then if I don't make it accessible, it's excluding an entire section of the population. Right? Who's checking anyway? The person you get sued from is checking. And even if that's only 1 out of 100,000 people, isn't that the most, well, for the business owner, isn't that a very important thing? I want to make sure that no one can look at my document and say there's a barrier that is so egregious that I want to sue you. And I want to take a second to talk about no significant barrier. It's really a principle that I've adopted just probably in the last year. For the first 5 or 6 years of my time, I spent a lot of time saying, you must be compliant. Everything you must pass a checker 100%. That's a great goal to aspire to. But I'd much rather you create a document with no significant barrier than not create a document with accessibility because you're afraid of failing a checker. And how do we make sure there's no significant barrier? We test our document with a screen reader. And on day one, the pre-conference lab, Chad and I, we did a full day pre-conference lab on how to test your document for accessibility with NVDA. And there's some postcards here down at the bottom that give you a cheat sheet of some of the shortcuts you can use. And if you're interested in figuring out more about that, just see me after the presentation. The next one is we don't have anyone with a disability in our organization. We don't really need to consider color blindness. It's not really a thing. There's nobody in our business that's colorblind. In fact, we know that the statistic says that of these people that are on this image here, we have a slide that has 4 businessmen and a businesswoman all staring inquisitively at the screen, that at least one of them is going to be colorblind. Right? So, my name is Dax Castro. I'm an Adobe certified PDF accessibility trainer. I'm also certified by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and I'm going to slow down, I apologize. You can find us at accessibilityunraveled.com. You can email me at training@accessibilityunraveled.com. We provide accessibility training and document training for learning how to make documents accessible. We have a podcast called Chax Chat, and it's on every streaming platform. You just search the word Chax and you'll find us. We release once a week, and it's on a general breadth of accessibility topics. It's not just code and code compliance, but we have people from Good Maps. Good Maps is here. We've had them on the podcast, and we have lots of great guests, and Chad and I talk about lots of really important topics, and some that a lot of people have questions about. We have a PDF accessibility Facebook group that you can get to, and we have about 3,400 members, I think maybe 3,200 members in that group. And if you're struggling with document accessibility, your questions will be answered. We have a really active group of about 1,200 that are posting almost every single day. So who is accessibility for, really, right? Why are we doing these things to make our documents more accessible? Well, 12 million people 40 years and older have some form of vision disability, and this includes 1 million blind people. 48 million people have some form of hearing impairment. 39 million people have motor impairments, and these are US statistics only. And 6.5 million have cognitive impairments. The US Census says by 2030, people 65 years and older will outnumber their children. And that by 2050, the number of people who are blind or visually impaired in the United States is expected to double. This is not going away. We need to understand how to design our content to reach more people. And the truth is, accessibility benefits everyone. Everyone, when you see a document that's well designed, you look and you go, oh, this looks really great. I really love this design. There are so many visual cues that are going on that we aren't thinking about. But when we deal with accessibility, we add a second layer of organization, of relationships, of purposeful design that really benefits everyone. And in fact, the power of purchase for people with disabilities is $200 billion and growing. So if you think, well, our audience really isn't people with disabilities, okay, but those people have friends and relatives and people who are in their lives, and if they're passionate about a product, they're going to tell someone else as well. So we talk about not enough time, right? 80% of accessibility, and I'm serious about this, and I'll take anyone to task. 80% of accessibility is just using the program the way it was designed. Most of you have bad habits in InDesign or Illustrator or Photoshop or Word or PowerPoint or Excel that are hindering your ability to create accessible documents because you just design the way you've designed. A lot of us are self-taught, right? We just know what we know, and we're very narrow focused. You know, Chad and I always say, we get into a class and they say, how many people here would consider themselves an expert or an advanced user? And people raise their hand. And then by the end of that class, they come back and say, wow, I really didn't know what I didn't know. And I've kind of opened my thought process. And we call this the 20/70 rule. Accessibility adds 20% of time to your project when you consider it from the beginning. It adds some time, but not a significant amount of time. But if you wait until the end to make your document accessible, I promise you, it will add at least 50 to 70% of time. If your job took you 8 hours to make it, it's very likely that you'll spend 4 hours trying to fix it when you have to go back and go, oh, the entire color palette that I used is not the right one, or oh, I didn't add styles to my document, or I made it in Canva and it has no tags whatsoever. So some accessibility is better than none. And I talked about no significant barriers. But what does that really mean? It means that I have a reading order, that as you go through the items in the document, they are read in the order that makes the most sense. Now, in many documents, it can be, you could read it in a couple of different ways, and it would still make sense. But there are documents where maybe you have a 2-column layout, and you want to make sure it reads the left column and then the right column, but not across both columns. And in fact, I had a document where the text read across both columns, and it made sense. When you read it, you would have never known that it was not a complete sentence or that it was 2 parts of a thing. So it was only till you got down about halfway through, about 3/4 of the paragraph, that you're like, wait a minute, what are they really trying to say here? And that's a very, that's mental gymnastics that you shouldn't ever force anyone to do, because at that point, they have no idea that the information's wrong. Heading structure is your next thing. You want to make sure that you have clear, organized heading structure. And that goes by using styles, right? By making sure that your heading levels are H1, H2, H3. I think of it this way. It's like being on a ladder. I would only move myself up 1 rung or down 1 rung. I would never jump up over a rung, or I would never jump down a rung and skip one. I'd kill myself, right? Same thing with heading levels. Just keep them in order. Now, there's some caveats and some things that you can do when you're talking about sidebars and other things like that, but for the most part, no significant barrier means I've got headings to allow my user to move from one area of a document to another without having to listen to everything else in between. And then the third thing that is no significant barrier would be alt text, making sure that you have a proper description, right? And when you look at this elephant on this slide, you might think, okay, there's this big giant gray elephant. Does it have meaning? Does it lend to what's going on my slide? Not really. In this case, it would be decorative. But if I were talking about the extinction of African elephants in 2050, it might be important to describe a male bull elephant with large ivory tusks, lots of scars, and walking in the foreground of a dusty desert. That's better than a gray elephant, wouldn't you say? And if you can take that time to make it meaningful, that's great. So what makes a graphic accessible? The first one is structure and relationships. When you have a bar chart or a line graph, there is an axis, there are bars, there is a trend or an outlier or some kind of data information there. There is a structural relationship between one item and another. The next thing is having descriptive content, and we just talked about alt text, but being descriptive in a bar chart or a line graph is a little harder. Equitable access. If I give you a table instead of a bar chart, but my bar chart had 50 bars in it, and you give me a table that has 50 columns and 50 rows, how many data points is that? A lot. If you had to go through and memorize all of that to try to figure out the relationship from one column to another, or calculate the average and then remember that number from one column to another, that's mental gymnastics, right? So while WCAG says that we can present an alternate format of a graphic, in this case, a bar chart, the equitable experience is not the same, right? Yes, you've satisfied the requirement, but then I would probably add a table summary to that table, right? Saying something like, sales for January sharply increase as noted in the table below, or a table calculating and then give some summary of what's going on in this table. So as someone's going through the data, there's some correlation there. equitable access. So why do people think it's so hard? The first thing is they don't understand what the expected user experience is. It is the one question I want you to walk away. It's the one thing I want you to walk away from this presentation thinking about. Because if you can't answer this question, you are not going to effectively understand how to create this graphic in an accessible way. Do I want them to walk through the flow chart, one piece by piece? Do I need them to understand the relationship between action 1 and action 2 in my infographic? How will I want them to walk through all of these thought bubbles that are on top of each of these diagrams? If you don't understand that experience or what you think you want it to be like, how are you going to create a solution that creates a more equitable experience? Then, of course, planning is the next thing. People don't plan. Accessibility at the end is the hardest way to do things. But a lot of people think, your managers and PMs just think it's a press of a button. Oh, just run it through the filter and then fix the errors. Great, that passes the checker, but it doesn't create a really immersive or a really great experience for the end user. And then the last one is knowledge. Of course, knowledge is the one thing that we're all here for. Everyone here at this conference wants to learn more about accessibility, right? I mean, we're all here to gain some kind of knowledge. Accessibility is a journey. The things I know now, I didn't know. There are things I know now that I didn't know last year. There are things I have yet to learn that I will learn in future years. Start somewhere, build your knowledge, but realize that it's a journey. But you want to ask yourself, what is the expected user experience? I want everybody to say that. What is the expected user experience? One more time. What is the expected user experience? That is your key driver. Because when you have a table like this, which is a table showing about 25 columns, and there's probably 20 rows, and in between it there's some large merge cell subtopic kind of categories, and then in every one of the data cells there's these green dots. What do I want the green dots to say? How do I want a user to be able to interact with this table? What do I want the user experience to be? Now, the fact that the table has vertical text, that's a cognitive disability. If I can change this in a way to where I don't have that vertical text, that would be preferable. What do I want the dots to say? I could handle it a couple of different ways. I'll tell you how I would handle this. I would put in 1-point type, maybe white, the word I want to be read when they get to each one of those cells. Selected, on time, on budget, approved, right? Whatever that word is that represents what that circle means. And I would put that in text inside that cell so that when the screen reader gets to it, it voices it. That avoids my problem of having to go through every one of these cells, anchor that image into the cell, and write alt text for that image. That's a lot of extra work when I can just copy and paste the word into every one of the cells. Then what happens to my dots? At that point, they're just decorative. They can be artifacted. I don't have to worry about how I put them in the table, right? Understanding the user experience, planning for how you're going to tackle the problem, so when you get there, you know what the solution is, right? We know that there's sideways text, and the text is in all caps. If I'm going to change this table, I probably want to change that to camel case because it's easier to read for everyone, not just people with cognitive differences, right? How we design affects the user experience. The table, the image that I have on screen currently is 4 separate tables, all separated by, I don't know, half an inch or so, with different seats and prices for a show in a theater. The problem is they're 4 separate tables. And so the relationship between this data is broken. I spent 45 minutes fixing this table because someone wanted to add a little white space in between the different sections, right? Theoretically, you could have designed this as one solid table and added some blank cells, but you'd still have to clean it up in the tags tree. You'd still have to go in there and make sure that you removed those blank columns because you don't want those read by assistive technology, right? The first table shows standard 5-show subscription, Saturday matinee, Sunday evening. I have to read this on the screen here. Ladies night, wed, thur, mat, thur, eve, fry, eve, sun, Eve, and preview. Now we might be able to say, well, I understand what Thur means, probably Thursday, right? But the association between one cell and another is lost, right? When I look at these and I look at this first row, the Saturday and Sunday, I have no idea that it associates with every one of these rows across the board. Every one of them. So my only recourse is to merge them all into one table. In fact, each of these three just say A plus, A and B. I have no idea what A plus, and B are. They're color-coded. And now I've got to look at the image on the right-hand side to figure out which ones they are. Where does it go? Which ticket am I buying? But if I were to simply add some labels to that map, now it's a much easier user experience to understand where I want to sit. It benefits everyone, not just people with disabilities, right? Normally what we need is this association. We want it to say general, A, then whatever the day is, and then the value of the ticket. But we've got all of those values in that one cell, so the user has to hear every one of those values before it gets to the actual price. That's a cumbersome user experience, wouldn't you say? Yeah? The table that's on the screen right now has 2 columns and 4 rows. It says project and status at the top, and it says projects A, B, and C. A is green, B is yellow, C is red. We use this all the time. We call it the stoplight syndrome, right? This is not an accessible chart. It's not an accessible table because I have to be able to, 1, perceive color, 2, make the correlation between the color and the legend that says on time, at risk, or late. If we add text to this table, now for someone who's using a screen reader, it's a great experience. But for someone with low vision, the words on time, at risk, and late that are now placed inside these colored cells are really hard to read. So we've solved half the problem, but not the other half. If we just simply darken the green color, change our text color to black in the yellow slot, in the yellow square, and white on red is an accessible combination in this instance, we now have a completely accessible chart for both a sighted person and someone using assistive technology. And I think all of us would agree that the table on the right is much easier to read than the table on the left. You immediately know what's going on. Small changes make big differences. What do we want the user experience to be here? This is a map of the downtown Sacramento where I live with the light rail routes on it. And it's got color-coded yellow, green, and blue lines. But if I'm a person using assistive technology, what information am I supposed to get from this? What's the important part? There's a ton of different ways you can attack this map. If I want to know where all the stops are on a specific line, I could go through each one of these circles and add alt text to each one of them, telling them what line it's on and what color it is. Because their whole system runs on color. You get on the green line, or you get on the yellow line, or you get on the blue line. And if I want to stop, where do I want it to stop? I want to stop at 7th and 8th, the county center, right? Okay, well, I need to know which ones get me there. And so understanding that user experience, right? What do we say? What do I want the user experience to be? What is the expected user experience? Totally dictates what approach you're going to take here, right? Sometimes you have a PDF that was created in Illustrator. And in the example on the screen, we can see inside the tags tree that each of all of these elements in this infographic that talks about food insecurity has an individual element. It has headings and body copy and a list. And I can leverage those graphic items by tagging those graphic items manually so that the user can then walk through food insecurities was already on the rise and then look at the statistics that say 24% in 2014 and 25.9% in 2019. Now, to me, that's a color contrast barrier because I have a really hard time reading that, right? And if you want to talk to the This is, I believe it's the UN that put this out. Feel free to tag them or talk to them. I've been trying to get at them for quite a few years. I will say the World Health Organization and the World Food Program are currently working on all of their accessibility programs and have taken great steps to make sure that going forward their content is more accessible. So we can make a difference. We can make improvements, okay? So how do I adequately describe meaningful items? When I have an infographic like this one, which happens to be a water cycle, it's an illustrated example of a water cycle showing things like precipitation and snow melt and surface flow and percolation. There's all these different elements. I first need to tell myself, what do I want the user experience to be, and identify a flow. How do I want this information to flow? How would I want them to be presented in the right order, right? Meaningful sequence. So I would develop that meaningful sequence, and then I'm going to take it and divide my image up into how many parts do I need, because I want them to be able to walk through each one of these elements, right? So if I'm in PowerPoint, it's very easy to do crop. You put your image inside in PowerPoint, and you start cropping. You make a copy of it and you crop the other direction. I wish we had time to go through how to do this in this session, but if you're interested, find me on LinkedIn and ask me. I promise you I will share with you how to do this technique. Once you have all of these images, then you can develop your alt text, right? And so what you want to avoid is the desire to expand the description beyond what's visible. You're not trying to give a screen reader user an extra experience. You're just trying to make it equitable, because then you can create a reverse bias where someone using a screen reader is going to get all this other additional information, but myself as a sighted user, I'm only getting the precipitation falls into the snow melt and then into the surface flow and out into the ocean, right? So how can I provide a more equitable experience? In this example, I have 4 different columns in what was a table. And there are 2 rows. One says, it talks about the rainfall in a specific given area, but below it, it has symbology that shows little water drops of different sizes. And those sizes tell a story. So you wouldn't want to artifact these images. In fact, you'd want to describe them. Alt text might sound like storm pattern showing a short period of normal rain followed by an extended period of heavy rain. Because when we look at that, this very first image, we can see we have some small dots, some small water droplets, and then some big water droplets, and that's telling a story. There's something meaningful there, and we all can see it because it's right there for us, but someone using assistive technology might not be able to get the same thing. I want to make sure that I have the same experience, right? One of the other ones you could do, we have storm patterns showing consistent rain over a long period of time. All of these dots, all these water drops are all the same size and equally spaced. We're able to take the visual representation and convert it into a description, right? The equitable experience can sometimes mean adding body copy to our presentation. Now, many of us get documents that are already designed and we really don't have the opportunity, but if I'm planning, if I'm designing with accessibility in mind, I'm thinking about these things in the beginning. How am I going to explain all of the elements going on in the atmospheric rivers that are primary source of major flood events in Central California, right? There's lots of different data points in here. There's actions going on. There's these blue arrows that are showing a story, right? And so when I look at the alt text, it says, I'm not going to read what it says, but it says a summary of some of the things that are in the infographic, but it's missing all of those blue arrow points. That's a disparity. We missed the ball. And then at the end, it says, for more information, contact us about this graphic at a website address that I made up to protect the innocent. I don't know if they're innocent, but to protect the people that made this graphic. That is not an equitable experience. I should not have to disclose that I have a disability and that I need extra information to you just because you don't want to make the effort of making this graphic more accessible. My disability is my own business. And when you force me to contact you to get a more accessible version, I now have to out myself to you. Right? So we talked about these 3 different areas, and we could add alt text, or we could break this image apart like we did before and maybe add alt text for those, or we could just make sure we include it in the body copy. Right? So the difference between a figure, alt text, and caption, I think, is an important one that I'd like to just talk about for a second. A figure is anything that is not text. A figure can be a formula or a pie chart or a photo or an infographic. It can be lots of different things. Alt text is a description of those things. In this case, we have 2 young women in traditional Indian clothing stare into the camera. That is a description of what's going on. We don't want to start that with a photo of, because a photo is assumed. But if it were a pie chart, an aerial, a line graph, or something else that needs to be identified, we want to start there. Pie graph showing, and then go on. The caption is extra information. In this case, it's the photo credit. It might be a description that says women in third world countries get paid 80% less than men. That's not a description of the photo. And it's improper to take that caption and copy it into the alt text of the image and say, I'm good, I passed the checker. Right? It should be a description of the image. But when you have a caption that is the exact description of the image, you don't want to present that twice. So then you have a choice. You can artifact the caption, or you can artifact the image. You only want to present them with the one piece of information once, not over and over and over again. Remember that alt text cannot be paused. When you write really long pieces of alt text and someone misses something in the middle, they've got to go all the way back to the beginning and start over again to hear the entire thing over. So be careful about how long you create your alt text. The idea that, we tell you 2 to 3 meaningful sentences because a screen reader cuts it off. Screen readers nowadays are at 1,200 words. That's a lot. So it's no longer the barrier of the screen reader. It's really just a barrier of not being able to pause and walk through it like you could body text. URLs are not clickable or accessible inside alt text. In fact, when you get to a URL, the punctuation in the URL is read as a period or not voiced at all. So when I have URLs in my alt text, I make sure that I say, google.com. But then I know that they're not going to be able to click on it. If it's something more than something simple that they might need to know, I might have the graphic link to that actual URL. Body descriptions are always really important. When you can use them, you should. In fact, this is a real example of a line graph that shows 5 different complex data points that talks about skills and demand. And as I was writing alt text for this, I had to read all the body copy to try to figure out what was going on. The good thing was, it was super descriptive, and it gave me a really great understanding of what was going on. So in the end, I was able to write my own alt text for this image that says, line graph illustrating the relationship between skill supply and demand, considering average relative pay, and the number of workforce in a sector as described in the following paragraph. I didn't have to write a dissertation on what was going on with each line and what direction it was and the relationship between one item and another. I could just simply refer to the other paragraph while giving some meaningful information. It's really not very good user experience to say pie graph as described in paragraph 12. Give them something. What are the main potential barriers that we should be considering? If you have a phone, take it out and take a picture of this. Font, language, color blindness, color contrast, color as a differentiator, items in red or whatever. Structural relationships. Is there a relationship between my headings and my bullets and my images? All of those. Text as images. I want to avoid being text as a primary JPEG or PNG. Formulas. If I've got formulas, we all know formulas are the worst thing to deal with in accessibility in a PDF because there's no other way to do it currently than to provide alt text. Who's doing that work? Tables can be a huge barrier if you don't understand how to create them correctly or how to then tag them appropriately. And then finally, images. Having descriptive images, having descriptions of those images is really important. The programs we use are key because every one of these programs has some specific barrier. If you're dealing with a Word doc and you use complex tables, you're going to have issues. If you're dealing with PowerPoint and you put text inside colored squares, you're going to have issues. If you're using Publisher or Canva, you should walk out of this room. No, I'm just kidding. If you're using Publisher, I'm sorry. If you're using Canva, they actually just started creating tags in their documents, but unfortunately they need a little bit more training because you'll find that it is a div inside a div inside a div inside a div, and then there's a paragraph tag. Good try, but we'll get there. We're working with them, okay? More than color alone, we talk about color, simply adding dots to our line graph, our different shapes. So in this case, we have 3 lines and a line graph. And on the left side, we have just the typical example with no dots for the data points. And on the right side, we have the 3 different data points with circles. Well, the problem is that when you look at that in colorblind mode, 2 of them are the same color. But if we just simply change the shape of the data point to a square for one, a triangle for another, and a circle for the last one, now I don't care what color it is. I can tell which one is which. It's an easy fix, right? Illustrator has a colorblind checker in it, and you can go to View, Proof Setup, Colorblindness, and Deuteranopia. And there's Deuteranopia or Protanopia. Deuteranopia is the most common one you're going to find, but either one is going to give you a very similar experience to tell you which if you have colors that are barriers. Colorblind evaluation tools for Mac. You have Daltonizer or SimDaltonism. There are others out there. But you could use those on your phone to show people the difference. And the reason we care is 1.4.1, the use of color only says that we should not use color to convey meaning, information, indicate an action, prompt a response, or distinguish a visual element. And some colorblind facts, 8% of males have color blindness, 0.5% females. If you're in a white population, predominantly, you have a higher propensity for color blindness. If you are in a dark skin complexion area of the world, you have a lower propensity for color blindness, almost 2%. But don't think those statistics give you an out. I know someone who is Indian and female and happens to be colorblind. Right? So in this example, our 5 different values show that 3 of them are almost exactly the same color when you think about color blindness. So I have 2 minutes left and I have 10 slides. So what I want you to understand is, remember, think about how you're telling the story. What is the expected user experience? You want to map your process, understand where you are right now, and how does accessibility impact what's going on? How does it impact my budget and schedule? Right? Who's going to be doing the work? How are they going to be doing it? Are they budgeting for that time? When it comes to a design life cycle, we want to consider color first, develop our content, figure that while people are doing source changes and revisions, you should be going back to your document and considering all the accessibility things that you found that you should be changing. So that when you get to that final PDF, there are so few modifications that it's almost all ready to go. Because we know if you change a document after the fact and you start modifying your PDF, you have to do it all over again. There are design considerations and delivery considerations, and you want to make sure that you account for both. You want to make sure that if you can delegate something, do it. Make sure you spread that work out, because designing at the end is really the worst way to do it. Thinking of accessibility at the end is the worst way to do it. And remember, you don't all need to be experts. You don't need to know it all. Accessibility is a journey, and I hope that you'll take me along for the ride. Thank you very much. I do have some stickers and some of those cards up here. I'm happy to answer questions afterward, but just come on up.